Welcome to the Spoilercast for Rehydrate. This episode will contain spoilers for all of the Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. If you don't want to be spoiled on future events, please skip this episode. This is Season 3, Episode 3, The Spell, where we will be discussing all of Part 2 of The Dark Forest by Lucy Shin. My name is Amin, and I have only read up to the current point, but I also don't mind spoilers.
Hi, this is Dan. I've read the entire series.
Hi, this is Thalia. I've listened to the entire series and I'm rereading along with the Spoilercast.
So just quickly, let's go over what happened in these chapters. So a lot of things happened. This is a pretty consequential pivot point in the series, in the book and the series. We have Tyler's double/triple cross program that is revealed, and he eventually kills himself at Loa G's house. We have the UN saying the PDC saying they set up Zhang Yuan the whole time and tells Loa G to get to work. He does and realizes the dark forest theory, which he tests by sending a quote-unquote spell to a star 50 light years away. Zhang Beihai kills all the old school scientists who are researching the old school methods of rocket propulsion and engine technology by simulating a meteorite shower using fashioned bullets out of meteorites. Heinz and Keiko figure out the mental seal and try to implant a quote-unquote faith in victory. Keiko figures out what he's doing at the last minute, and Diaz goes full villain and plans to destroy the solar system so that no one can have it. Says he's going to blow up New York City if they don't let him go, and they do, but his people stoned him to death anyway. Alpha of a Post I saw on Reddit, I had an idea that I thought was an interesting prompt of if we had to choose a wall facer, given the parameters of the wall facer program, that's basically no parameters, who would you choose?
I think that I would probably choose someone who Lucy Shin would probably approve of because he's a writer as well. He's a novelist. I would probably choose someone with really big ideas who could face the end and the annihilation of Earth without really flinching. And to me, that was Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide. And I think he might be able to get us out of here and would be a less bleak choice than choosing, like you've mentioned on the main show, choosing like hyper military forces, since we've already seen that fail with one suicide and like more in this coming episode that we're going to talk about just ends very poorly. So I'd try and go into like a soft power. How about you, Dan?
I was trying to think of not a military person, but a person who I considered to be very smart and very strategic and was able to kind of think in like multi-dimensional, like in a multi-dimensional way, because like we're fighting an enemy we don't really understand. So my best guess was a chess grandmaster named Magnus Carlsen, who I thought was famously is super smart about like being able to remember and plan strategies like millions of moves in ahead, right? Like basically like after the first move in a chess game, he'll have it all figured out. That kind of like multi-dimensional thinking would be really useful in planning a kind of strategy where you need to face an enemy where you have no idea what they're going to do next.
I like both of your suggestions. So my thought was someone who is no longer alive, but I wanted someone who could think about problems creatively and come up with solutions that are less than obvious. So were he still alive, I would go with someone like Steve Jobs, someone who understands technology, but really is more of in my mind, more of a problem solver, and let him see what he might be able to come up with.
I feel like that could go either very well or very poorly. That could really fork, yeah. I think that maybe an entrepreneur, especially a tech entrepreneur, would be more accepted in a society rather than like a chess master or an author. So especially since we're going to be seeing in part 2 how society is responding to like the wall facer plan, I think it's a good prompt for us to think about. And I wanted to know if you read the Reddit post, was there like one approved answer that you could weigh in on?
I don't think so. I mean, the consensus choice seemed to be Elon Musk, right? Like that was like the most answered one. Or there was another one that was like Mr. Bean, so that was pretty interesting. And I was like, it got me thinking about like who would be like the most ridiculous wall facer, and I was like, who would be incomprehensible to both humanity and Tri-Solaris? And like my best answer was like maybe Tom Green. Like no one have any idea what he's doing, and like well,
Jay-Z,
part of the plan, I guess.
Renaissance man.
And speaking of plans, I talked about this a little bit on the main show. One of our readers, Frank, he kind of cued us into the original plan that Tyler had. For people who maybe don't listen to the main show, but listen to just this one. The main gist, and I know there's a spoiler cast, but there's a spoiler for Ball Lightning. So if you haven't read Ball Lightning, I'll put a note in the chapter markings. You can skip this, but this will have spoilers for Ball Lightning. Anyway, so the idea is that to go over it really briefly, Ball Lightning is kind of like a mythical weapon, but it's a weapon within the universe of Liu Cixin's universe. He has another book called Ball Lightning, and the idea is that like it kind of changes the quantum state, I guess, of molecules and stuff it interacts with. And so Tyler's original plan was that he's going to unleash Ball Lightning on the Space Force, which would look like it annihilates them, but it actually just moving him into the quantum state where he figured they would be invulnerable to any attack. The problem is that once you're in the quantum state, it kind of decays after a little while and like it eventually just fades away. So he basically kills all of them and hopes that like their training will make them still want to attack the Trisolarans, even though they know they're in the quantum state and they don't have that much time to live. But they would want to, kind of, for the benefit of Earth, still attack the Trisolarans in the quantum state. And so, I think it's an interesting plan. It's a little bit, it's a lot more technical and a lot more kind of relying on prior knowledge of Liu Cixin's work. But yeah, Thalia, I know that you weren't on the main show, so what do you think of this plan versus Tyler's actual plan?
Yeah, I did listen to the main show, but shout out to people who only listen to this show. I'm talking about my parents, of course. I was not very impressed by the Ball Lightning plan. I think you went over a couple of the aspects, like quantum state not being something that's very well understood, and therefore it sort of being harder to break the suspension of disbelief. But I think a bigger problem is that it's just kind of flat. Like, yes, it relies on new technology, but the base plan is like rely on soldiers training. And for a long time, military generals have been putting soldiers in like unescapable positions and relying on their training. Like, we're going to trap you in this unescapable terrain, but keep fighting for your country. And that's already happened. So that's not hard to believe. It's just not very interesting. So I don't mind the edit into English cutting it out.
One of the ideas that Frank had is like why they didn't do this plan originally is because this Ball Lightning wasn't translated to English by the time this book came out. English readers would have had no idea what they're even talking about. Like, unless like you're a super hardcore Liu Cixin fan and was able to read it in Chinese or whatever. But yeah, so I think that is a good call to kind of change it around. But interestingly, like I found that when I was looking at the book, Joel Martinson, the guy who did the translation for Dark Forest, actually did the translation for Ball Lightning too. So, so I don't know if like that he did it because he was like interested enough in that plan, or maybe just in the good graces of him and Ken Liu are the approved translators, I guess, for his works.
I haven't read Ball Lightning. I don't know if you have, Amin.
I have not, no.
But I did start it after Dan mentioned it, I think last week, maybe the week before. And there's a reason I haven't finished it, even though we're recording the next podcast. I just think it's a less successful work. And I read The Remembrance of Earth's Past. I could read it nightly, honestly, but Ball Lightning is just, it's very hard to advance in. It's just, I'm very glad that this is the one that we are building a podcast around.
So when you say hard, like, is it like too like technical, too like a lot of the reason that this series is so successful because it's not just like scientific concepts, but it's scientific concepts married with like personality and like society stuff. Like there's a lot of things that go into this book, and that's just like tech porn, right? So like, is Ball Lightning more in that vein?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, first of all, all the action centers around atmospheric physics, which is the weather. So it's harder to buy into than like humanity's future among the stars.
Yeah.
And it's all written from the first person, which maybe I'm a little bit prejudiced, but I find a little dull after a while. And it's just, since there's really only one character so far, we have to rely on him to tell us everything about this universe. And he's like, this is the kind of person that my professor is. He's the kind of person who refuses to see any progress. And I'm like, well, you could show me that. Because it's very, I just like take your word for it. And then, I don't know, I just was not that impressed. Maybe it will have some transformation and redeem itself in the second half of the book, but you'll have to wait until next week.
Well, so the next thing I want to talk about was when I was noticing when I was like kind of reading through this and like trying to take notes and stuff. So after, I'm going to read one of the quotes. So after Zhang Beihai's assassination of the scientist, the ETO talks about it. So they say, are we just going to sit by and let him do this, Einstein asked. In accordance with the Lord's intentions, that's all we can do. The man is extremely stubborn, holdout, and a triumphalist, and the Lord doesn't want us to interfere unnecessarily with that type of human. Our attention must be focused on escapism. The Lord believes that defeatism is more dangerous than triumphalism. But yeah, I just thought that part was interesting and like still setting it up that he's still a triumphalist, right? And it's interesting that like the Trisolarians are so fooled by Zhang Beihai and really don't care about triumphalism. I don't know. I think like this reads particularly because I'm trying to like give clues, I guess, on the podcast about Zhang Beihai and like, but like not being too obvious about it. And this seemed like a pretty interesting one to me.
Definitely. I mean, you have to believe that Trisolaris understands like more than humankind does. And I don't know that we have reason to believe that, but if you do, you'll understand that yes, defeatism is actually more dangerous. And yes, we've seen how incredible the Trisolarian ships are later on, and we know that yes, human fighters, whether they're alive or quantum, are really not going to pose. They're just like flicking pebbles at a tank. So they actually are right on both of those counts. I don't know that it gives me a clue about Zhang Beihai, but I mean, I'm glad that his feat got some attention since it would have just gone down completely unnoticed since he left no trace. I hope we get to talk a little bit about that assassination in this show because that was just so cool. I mean, did you read it this week?
It seemed like an overly complex plan, so I understand that he didn't want it to be traceable, but it seemed like going through all the trouble to buy meteors and then shape them into bullets and do all that kind of stuff seemed, again, it was clever in a James Bond villain type of way, but I don't know. I think there might have been a more practical way to do this besides meteor bullets. Unless this leads to something else. If this is just a one-off thing, then it seemed overly elaborate. I mean, it was cool, but it seemed overly elaborate.
I disagree. I think there's more characterization in the Meteor Cellar than in like all of Ball Lightning as a book. I think I immediately believe that Meteor Cellar is a person, and like I don't know, the bargaining makes sense. The Meteor Cellar, like being able to understand what he thinks is 100%, like, oh, okay, so you want something that you can engrave, but not actually being able to ascertain Zhang Beihai's real plan is like very clever. I think that it is complex, but it's sort of necessarily complex because it's such early days for humans in space. Like later in the third book, we can see someone can just like hop on a space elevator, go up, like a normal civilian can do that. But now he has to rely on being a military trained personnel and having lobbied for them to spend time in space because that was like not a given. And then he has to go into this sparsely populated area where there's not really life support, and he has to just rely on his little spacesuit propellers. And you see when he's actually reaching out his hand to shoot, like he's in the empty vacuum of space, he would freeze his hand off. So he has to like angle his hand next to the light of the sun so that the sun's rays can keep his hand from freezing. I just think like it's such a primitive world that he's in. I think like the human part has to be really complex.
The major thing that I saw was that his whole plan is like really like a long-term thing, right? Like he's already angling to like get to be able to hibernate so he can go into the future to kind of execute his plan, right? And so it's really, really important to him that he doesn't get caught, because obviously if he's caught by murdering people, he wouldn't be in the good graces of the military, wouldn't be up for the future reinforcements contingent or whatever they're called. And so he really has to be really careful about the not getting caught. And so it's interesting that the Trisolarians like had a chance to like out him and like just could have like put it on the news, or whatever. The ETO could have put it on the news like they did all the other wall breaker plans, and saying, hey, by the way, Zhang Beihai murdered a bunch of people. And like maybe people wouldn't have believed it, maybe they would have, but maybe there would be enough doubt where they don't get sent in the future. Ultimately, like that's kind of the downfall of the Trisolarians, right? Like that leads to the, Zhang Beihai being able to go into hibernation. It leads to him being able to escape. It leads to the gravity eventually like sending that broadcast. So, and then the humans like, becoming the galactic race. So if they had just not been kind of short-sighted, I guess they probably could have saved their civilization or their planet for a little while anyway.
Did all of this need to happen in outer space? Like, is this going to have implications in the future? Like, could he have taken them to the bottom of the ocean and killed them all and not been traced? in some other way, or
Nah, I mean that part was just. I think that's just cool. They did it in space. I think like
aesthetic.
yeah. I mean there's a lot of talk of I think even in this chapter about like how the future reinforcements need to start getting training in space. Because like ultimately when they go into the future, they're going to be in space primarily, right?
Yeah, but that's just a ruse. I mean, he's just like lobbying, saying anything. He's promising the world, just like, yeah, no, it's super important that I, get into space.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I might be grasping, but Amin brings up a point, like, did it have to be in space, or could it have been like on Earth, or just somewhere where you could have disposed of people? And we kind of see this echoing in the third book when we see this man from the Common Era who's hibernated and is facing the protagonist of the third book, and he is holding a gun from the Common Era, and his explanation is like, guns are monitored now, 200 years in the future.
Yeah.
You can't just shoot people willy-nilly because like everything is tracked. So we do need something old school, or maybe we need to like drag people up into space and just have it be less traceable, because this assassination is, except for Sophon's, completely untraceable.
Yeah, less cameras. I don't know. There's less cameras in space. Like it seems like to be probably pretty monitored. But they also talked about like there's a lot of activity happening on the bases up there, like people flying back and forth, a lot of space debris. That's where I thought he'd go unnoticed, I think. And plus, like it makes it seem like an accident, right? But yeah, I mean,
space, no one can hear you scream.
But it is I will admit that it is a complicated plan, but it's a cool one.
Yeah, that's fair. But let's go back on Earth, since I know you have also written about Secretary General Say, and we're back to like the wall facers in this whole chapter or part.
One thing I also noticed, like, and I don't know if this actually like is part of it, but I'll read another passage that I copied. So it says, and I think this is at the end of the chapter when they're kind of like wrapping up everyone's story. And they say, after leaving her second term, Secretary Say launched the Human Memorial Project, whose goal was the comprehensive collection of data and commemorative artifacts of the human civilization that would ultimately be sent out into the cosmos in an unnamed spacecraft. So that reminded me of the Pluto Project. So for Amin and maybe other people who don't care about spoilers, at the end of the third book, basically all humans, they send all their artifacts, like their precious artifacts, like the Mona Lisa and that kind of stuff, to Pluto for preservation, because they figured like that's the best place to. That's the most safe place in the solar system. I didn't know if this is a kind of a precursor to that, or maybe it's like just a lot of humans have this kind of plan.
I think, yeah, it's been a human plan for a while. I don't know whether anyone would have trusted their kooky plan to this early stage. Be like, yeah, take the Mona Lisa, just launch it into space. Take the Qingming Shanghe too. That's fine. But yeah, it definitely could have been, like proof that this does work.
Interesting echo, I thought. Like, so I don't know like how much foreshadowing he's actually trying to put in there. Like all my reading into dimensionality and like.
Oh, I think that is on purpose.
Do you think like in Three Body Problem he had the idea of like, oh, by the time the series ends, like the solar system's going to collapse into 2 dimensions? I don't know, maybe.
Some kind of catastrophic, beautiful end necessarily. Yeah. In the like Ming Dynasty, the late Ming Dynasty, when a censor is criticizing a eunuch, it's like in 1600s or so, he does account like a list of crimes from the eunuch, and he says a slip of paper in the dead of night can kill a man, and humanity's end is a slip of paper. So I think there is some like foreshadowing, because he knows that humanity will end, or at least be destroyed, in this like beautiful but oddly sinister small way, not by a bomb.
And interesting, like it's like the slip of paper happens after like the whole world is like risen up to the idea of like creating bunkers, and like there's like this big technology project to like build these bunker projects and like these really expensive elaborate things, and the slip of paper comes in and just destroys everything.
I'm sure this will be revealed soon enough, because I actually started reading the next chapter to get ready for the next episode. But so the spell that is put on the star, what ends up happening with that? Is that a red herring, or is that just does something actually happen with that?
What makes you think it might be a red herring, Amin?
Because I don't believe in spells, and this world has not established that witchcraft is a real thing.
It's an ancient joke. That's what they keep saying in the
right.
in the beginning of this chapter.
Yeah. But there have been spells for like all of human history. how could I get people to come and, cater my witch doctor, if not by putting a spell on them? So I wouldn't necessarily say you can't have spells.
But do you actually want to say what happens, Thalia? I'll let you take that one.
Oh, sure. So he does make a big deal about, like, wake me up when the spell works. And maybe a little anticlimactically, he's woken up and he's like, aha, so the spell's worked. And they're like, what? What spell? What are you talking about? So people have forgotten about it, but it does eventually work. And the fact that it takes a little bit longer than he expected also ends up having some interesting ramifications for Earth's future. And it basically becomes sort of a threat both to humankind and Trisolaren kind that this could happen to them.
So do you want to say what happens?
Isn't that enough? So a star is a huge, source of energy in the cosmos. It has its internal fusion. And if it's disrupted, you don't really need a bomb. You can just use what's already in a solar system to destroy everything in that system. And that is indeed what happens. A small object is flicked at this star, and that causes it to just explode.
He talked a lot about the coordinates of those stars, right? And so the spell is he just broadcasted the coordinates of that star, using the flicking of the photoid towards the star. And basically, the whole conceit of the book is called the Dark Forest, because in the Dark Forest, you don't think about other people in the Dark Forest. You just attack first, so you're not attacked by yourself. So his idea in this spell is I'm going to broadcast the coordinates of the star into space, and probably someone's going to pick it up, and probably they're going to say oh, this is a civilization, let's just destroy it. So that's why he didn't want to do it too close to Earth, because if he had broadcasted the location of the sun, they would just blown up the sun, right? Or something that's close enough to this. Even Trisolaris is too close.
It's too
right?
close. That's right.
Yeah, so that's why he did it 50 light years away. And then eventually, because it takes 50 years for it to get there and 50 years for the light to get back, I think it's not that long after he wakes up that the star is destroyed and they see it destroyed. So that's a spell. And then humanity is oh my God, the spell worked.
But I should say we have no reason to believe that anyone on Earth or anyone on Trisolaris knows who, destroyed the star. It's just sort of becomes known that this is what happens if you're exposed. You'll just be annihilated. And they won't pay you the dignity or the courtesy of telling you who they are. They'll just eliminate you.
So who is they? Who is the one doing this, destroying the stars?
Big question,
huh?
Yeah. I mean, everyone, one person, one super advanced species.
Yeah.
You don't know. Point is, it's just a dangerous world.
Yeah. So if you remember the axioms of cosmic sociology, one of them was that everyone is for their own preservation, and the other is that there's finite number of resources in the universe, right? Probably there's billions of civilizations, and who knows how many of those billions and billions of civilizations have technology advanced enough or more advanced than ours to destroy solar systems. So it's hard for us to know, but the point is that if your location is known, it's just easier for them to just blow it up, rather than even having to worry about is this an advanced civilization? Are they going to be a threat to us eventually? Same way the Earth broadcasts their coordinates, and because of that, the Trisolarans go, cool, let's take that over. Other civilizations don't want that to happen to them. And so it's kind of, it's a big deal for not only this book, for the rest of the series. In the next book especially, but once Trisolaris realizes that Luoji knows how to do that, or knows this Dark Forest principle, that's why they consider him so dangerous, because now they can say, oh my God, he knows about this principle. He can broadcast the coordinates of Trisolaris, and we can get destroyed, right? And so that becomes a huge plot point in the next book.
I will say in this book, though, it's on page 211, if you're reading along at home, we do see the first evidence of Luoji realizing this potential in himself. And he reads, I'd once had a notion to work on cosmic sociology because then a small voice deep within him said, you're a wall facer. This was the first time he had heard that voice. So for the first time, he acts like a wall facer and swallows his words and sort of realizes how powerful cosmic sociology is.
I mean, I actually kind of had a question for you too. I know we threw a lot of spoilers at you, and a lot of and there's a lot of story that we're trying to unfold in a little bit of time here. How much does it actually resonate with you? Does it actually help what you're currently reading, or is this kind of well, that'll be interesting when we get to it?
It does help. I like not I like. I don't mind knowing what's going to happen, because to me it's similar to what I think Talia said either last episode or the episode before, about how when you reread it, you pick up new things. This way, I can pick up new things on my first reading. I would pick up things that I wouldn't pick up otherwise. So I don't think it affects me in a negative way to know these types of things. And you two do share a lot of information, and some of it I forget, to be quite honest, and then I get to that part in the book and I'm like, oh yeah, I should have known that. But um, the big things like this whole thing with the spell, I'll remember that.
Yeah, I think specifically, like as you're reading it, like just kind of keep it in mind, like yeah, like this kind of the spell is like a real thing. And like he doesn't know it's a real thing either. It's like it's pretty much a guess. It has, you know, at this point for him, but yeah, it does become basically the catalyst for the entire next book. You know, the spell is like kind of like a test case for the understanding of the dark force principle and what's eventually called deterrence. So like they call it deterrence because like Lua G says, "Hey, by the way, I can broadcast your coordinates to the universe, and it can blow you up." And so, like, they kind of come to like a mutually beneficial, arrangement, saying, "All right, well, we're not going to keep attacking the Earth, and you don't broadcast the coordinates."
But I think it's definitely like Arthur C. Clarke's first law. Like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So there's a lot of things that we have that 300 years ago would be spells, like we're talking here, from thousands of miles apart. So I don't think it's a problem for it to be a spell.
Yeah, that's I didn't put that together, but that's an interesting. Maybe that's why. Do you know in the Chinese is it also called us like something similar to a spell, or is it something different?
Oh, I should reread. Or you can ask Frank. I suspect it would be a spell. I know we're going to talk a little bit more Chinese in this episode, so I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, we can talk about that now. It's more a silly thing. So as I was reading this, there was like I'll just read the original text. This was in Zhang Beihai, and
I thought you were about to bust out the Chinese. All right, you're going to read the text in English.
No, I'll read the English. I can't read that. I copy and paste the Chinese. I can pick out like one or two characters, and that's about it. But yeah, this is when Zhang Beihai and Chang Wei-si, I think, are talking after. Or no, this is Heinz and Chang Wei-si are talking about the mental seal program. Anyway, so the quote is, "Doctor, I really applaud your unique ideas, and perhaps this is where the real answer lies. Thank you. All of us are basically Flintstones." And I was like, there's no way Chinese people know who the Flintstones are. It's like, that had to be like a translation, right? And so I picked up like from Google Translate. And so Google Translate says, it translates it as, "Doctor, I really appreciate your unique thinking. Maybe this is really the key. Thank you. We really are modern primitive people." And then my wife, who's Chinese, I also asked her, like, "Do you have any idea what the Flintstones are?" And she's like, she had no idea. And I had her read the original Chinese too. And she says, "Yeah, modern primitive people." And so, yeah, like it's an interesting choice that Joel Martinson went to go with the Flintstones. Like, I don't know why he made that choice.
That's weird. It feels like even saying like Stone Age would be like more comprehensible than
or like cavemen or something, right?
Yeah.
Like something that's like not quite as specifically not Chinese, right? Like I know Chinese people watch American cartoons, and like I'm sure like Mickey Mouse and whoever is popular, but Flintstones aren't popular enough.
Yeah, like the big deal. Big deal, but not the Flintstones. I didn't even catch that. So you are an eagle-eyed reader, Dan.
And not only that, I bet you there are Americans under a certain age
who
have no idea who the Flintstones are.
So actually, I had another question for Thalia. Like, as we're talking through these plans, and like I'm trying to think of like as I was reading it, if I was able to come up with any of these plans. Like, I think to me, like every single plan was surprising, and I had no idea about any of them. But like, there are context clues, I think for all of them. But he does, I think, intentionally try to throw curveballs at you by like having Tyler's and like the triple cross plan. Were you able to kind of suss out any of these programs as you were reading it, or was it a complete surprise to you when they were well broken?
I think I'd probably echo people on the main show. Like the easiest to maybe guess the contours were the earlier plans. I sort of thought there might be some kind of double cross, or like someone would turn on Earth or pretend to turn on Earth. That was a guess, but as the plans continued, I couldn't have guessed them. I have no idea that if you blow up enough chunks of Mercury, you could cause Mercury to fall into the sun. Like, I just read it and I'm like, yeah, it sounds good. I mean, I take your word for it. And as for the more sophisticated plans like Zhang Beihai's and Heinz, I actually do think it's possible to crack them. Like, again, if you have to believe what the Trisolarans believe, which is that defeatism is more dangerous. And so you'd have to believe that a successful plan would follow defeatism, not triumphalism. And maybe that's laid out really clearly. And maybe I wouldn't understand Yun Tianming's fairy tales if I were on the committee, because I didn't catch the metaphor. But I was not able to guess any of the plans.
I'm trying to, like, as I'm rereading Heinz's story, to see if there's any clues about him, his eventual plan. But I don't think there are. Keiko had, in the later chapter says, "Oh yeah, like I could see it in your eyes, and I saw it in like the other people's eyes, like the same way after they come out of the space center." But like, I don't think they talk about that. Maybe like it's different because it's the English translation or whatever. Like maybe it's more clear in the Chinese translation, or it's set up a little bit differently. To me, like I don't think there was any ways that you could have told, especially like Heinz's plan, and maybe Tyler's, maybe Diaz, I think, is kind of comes out of left field on purpose too. Like like it's gonna be about bombs and they blowing stuff up. Like I don't think you're supposed to know that he's gonna hold the universe hostage, or the solar system hostage. Yeah, I really don't think there's any way you could really tell Heinz's plan. John Beihai, maybe you can tell. Again, like they hammer the point so hard about him being a triumphalist. I think it'd be really difficult unless you were like really looking for it to think about anything differently.
Yeah, I mean, their two plans are thematically linked, even though the characters like probably never meet. It's all about you need to escape because you cannot win. So I think they both approach that. So if you've like cracked that, then you could probably see both of their plans.
Although even when because like they talk about Heinz in like pretty much the beginning of the next part, John has at the end of the next part, and I didn't catch it when I first read it. I was totally surprised by Zhang Beihai. I was actually probably more confused by what was happening rather than than not understanding, I guess. I think the first time I read it, because like I think Zhang Beihai's stuff is generally more confusing than surprising.
I definitely liked like part 3 where we see Zhang Beihai actually on the ship that he's worked like his whole life to have exist, on this ship that has the capacity to have interstellar travel. And he even tells Dongfang Yanshu, like, do you know how much I've sacrificed for this ship? And it ends up being why he's willing to, commit this devil act at the end. And he wants to save others from having to commit that. And I think that was more satisfying than Heinz. Like, I don't really know why Heinz subjected himself to the mental seal in either case. Like, it just wasn't as satisfying to have him, like, think water was toxic and then get cured of it and then tell the PDC that he'd used the mental seal on himself. So I would rather follow Zhang Beihai's story.
And one other thing I also kind of made a connection for was like, I think Tim also had said this, the part where they talk about the procedure of the mental seal was really interesting. Like how all these like procedures in place, and like they have to ask them a bunch of times. And it reminded me of the beginning of the next book with the Yun Tianming's euthanasia.
Oh yeah, like very beginning, like first like 50 pages or something.
Yeah, like you need to like answer the same question like 3 times, and like they give you, I think like the answer is like in a different place every single time, so you can't just like keep pressing the same thing. So
that was such a cool way to begin a book. Like I was like, whoa, we barely started and there's like voluntary euthanasia and a man's life can just like get snuffed out in 5 questions. It's a really interesting start to a book. Yeah, I actually hadn't thought of it, but that it is a very similar procedure.
Actually, I was going to maybe save this for Death's End, but now that I'm thinking about it, one of the things, like when I was first reading Death's End, I was starting to get disappointed that we have Yun Tianming being yet another person in the same mold as Wang Miao and Luo Ji in the beginning of it. And I was like, oh man, another kind of nerdy guy who like longs after some woman. But I mean, obviously his story doesn't continue that way. But like, did you have any similar thoughts with that way? Like when you first started reading Death's End?
Did I think that he was too similar to Wang Miao and Luo Ji?
Yeah, I mean, like, but like when you first started reading him, like, was it like another guy in the same kind of mold as these other 2 guys?
Not for me personally. Part of it was that I thought, well, this guy's terminal, so I'm not going to have to put up with him even if I don't like him, which, ended up being wrong. And I also found that he wasn't as, like, cringy as Luo Ji's pursuit of his dream lover, even though you could definitely read Yun Tianming as, like, always thinking about Chengxin, and I don't know, maybe you could see it as pining, but I think it's just handled a lot more coherently, and I think that's even shown with like just the introduction of more characters, and there's more to do. We see spoilers for the first 50 pages of Death's End, his high school or college classmate comes and he's like he's been a franchisor and selling his tea, I think, some kind of soft drink that's been very popular. And he's come to give Yun Tianming a share that he thinks he owes him for coming up with the idea. And that's used as the bridge. That's used as the bridge to like, yes, Yun Tianming remembered that day that he, told his friend the recipe. And he remembered it because that was the day that he first spent time with Chung Xin. And we're like, oh, cool. Sort of buried the lead, but actually this like amount of money and like this business success is like so minimized because this is like the day he meets the girl. Whereas Luoji is just sort of like sitting around bored in a mansion is like, you know what? How about a girl?
And the fact that like it's like a real person that he's pining after and not just like some imaginary, some like
that
idealized version. Yeah. Wang Miao in the beginning, the first book, he's like pining out, he's taking secret photos of Yang Dong. And then
also,
book,
Wang Miao's wife has no personality at all.
Yeah.
At all.
So yeah, I guess like because like we had got those two characters right in a row, even at this point, like we didn't know like how awesome Luoji turns out to be. Even at the end of the Dark Forest, he's sort of still kind of weird, and not until he becomes like the samurai cool guy that his character kind of turns. Yun Tianming could have been that same kind of character if they'd followed the same kind of trajectory. Maybe he did that on purpose too, right? Maybe like he set that up. It's like, all right, here we go. Here's another guy, and like that's another.
Well, I have loads more to say on Yun Tianming, but again, that's Death's End's territory.
Yeah, we'll save it for next season. One of the things we also talked about a little bit was about if we could figure out the plans ahead of time, and we'd also mentioned this in the main show, like the wall breakers has kind of come out of nowhere. There's no setup for it. So would you have liked to see more setup of the wall breakers, maybe like coming up with their plans or like kind of figuring out like parts of their plans or that kind of thing? Or do you like the big kind of surprise element? Maybe go to Amin first.
Yeah, I didn't mind the way it was done because I'm sure this is my shortcoming, but I'm not really interested in any of the other wall breakers. I think if the other wall breakers plans intersected with Wuji's or each other's plans more, it might have mattered more, but they all seem so isolated from each other that, and I think I talked about this maybe last episode of the episode before, where I felt like I could safely skim over that because that's not the hero story. So it was a distraction / diversion. So I didn't mind the way it was done, and I think I talked about this before. I thought the way they did like Diaz's death, I thought was well done. It was just really matter of fact and biblical and just really quick. I liked that. I thought that was well written. Not I like watching people get stoned, but I thought that was well written. No, I didn't mind this approach at all.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Amin. Like it was very matter of fact to see the end of Rey Manuel Diaz, and it wasn't drawn out. As far as the wall breakers, I think that again, I also would be inclined to not think of this as the hero's story. And I think the only way that could have been combated is if we were given some reason to believe that there would be tension, because the way it's happening in part 2 is like the moment that your wall breaker comes to you and like plants himself in the room and announces your time is up, that's it. And if there was some way that we could see like why, because I mean, surely as soon as everyone sees these 4 wall breaker or 3 wall facers at least making plans, like look at Reddit, it's full of conspiracy theories. Everyone's got their own like fan theory. I mean, WandaVision alone generated like 200 different fan theories that were all wrong. And why would the ETO be any different? Like, why are they legitimized? Why are they believed? Why can they leak to a major newspaper? So if we'd seen anything like building up or like that they have their own propaganda arm that's like legitimizing them, or like, I don't know. It's a little easy to just say like, I guessed the right pattern, so you're done for. Where in fact, I don't think it's that simple.
They talked about like they released a lot of data, like it was a big data dump. So maybe that lended more credence to their wall breaking. It's like they really forgot the theory, because I think I don't remember the exact passage, but I remember them talking about like they released like tons and tons and tons of information out there. So, and I think they also probably at least the information they got from the Sophons too, because I think most of the information they got was from the Sophons, because the Sophons are both able to like monitor all the wall facers, plus like they're able to read secret documents, so they're able to do basically whatever. And so I think they probably released a lot of information, and like it's just too much too much information to go against. That was my read of it anyway.
Okay.
I think the last thing I had was, I know, Thalia, you had mentioned before about there's that forward phrase, the falling leaf seeks to return to the root. And so actually, like in this chapter, one of the old guy characters, Zhang Yuanchao, like actually says it and says, Zhang Yuanchao shook his head, saying, "You intellectuals with your weird ideas, they're pointless. The fallen leaf returns to the root. I'm going to be buried in the yellow soil on the earth." I don't know if like the Shin just likes that phrase, because like he's also mentions it again in Death's End.
Definitely, it's a very popular phrase, very big in pop culture. I think it's "Yellow Guigan," and yes, it means that you want to go back to your ancestral home. And Guan Yifan at the very end of the third book is commenting on solar system humans and saying that was your fatal flaw. Like, you're clinging to this clump of dirt, and everyone seems to want to go back home. And that's not like a safe place, and it's not the right place. And it doesn't seem to be something that humanity manages to let go of. What do you think, Amin? Would you, if you knew that Earth was doomed, would you stick it out and have like a happy life until the end of Earth, or would you run away and try and seek your fortune?
If I knew Earth was coming to an end, I think I would just accept it and live my life. If it's out of my control, if it's something that's in my control,
you can't stop it. No, you can't stop it.
Then I would be. I would like to think that I would be very zen about the whole thing.
I would definitely jump on the opportunity to get on one of the galactic ships and leave, even if like it's like a hard life. Like the choice of being around for the Earth being destroyed, the potential of new and exciting opportunities, even if like doesn't even mean anything. At least there's like hope there. I'd be an escapist, I guess. Definitely like jump on those ships and get out.
Nice.
But isn't witnessing the end of Earth a once in a lifetime thing as well? Like, wouldn't you be curious what that would look and feel like?
Not curious enough to live through
it. No, I'll read about it later.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some broadcast about it. Watch on TV. I think at the end of the Death's End, didn't they like see like TV shows of like things flattening, right? So like I'll watch that show. Like, how about you, Thalia? What would you do?
Oh man, I mean, I think it'd be pretty easy for me to just claim that I will like jump on a ship, because I don't have any children, and I wouldn't be like necessarily dooming anyone else. Like, I only have responsibility for myself, so that seems more adventurous. And I think the whole concept of like children and descendants definitely gets like played around with it in an interesting way in this series. It's not sort of the automatic everyone cares about their own children and then that's the only narrative, which is like especially strong in China, because the protagonist in the third book is like an adopted woman who I think dies childless, and yet she's the one who carries on all of civilization. So there's definitely like flipping some ideas on their head.
And I remember like in the beginning of like the next chapter, when they actually jump into the future, they talk about like families not being such an important thing anymore, in marriage specifically. Like marriage and families, like they're not as important as they were in the past. Yeah,
they sort of gloss over that, but we could talk about that next episode, definitely.
So next episode, what should I be looking for in our next reading?
So I would focus a lot on Heinz's plan, and like I don't know if you got to that point yet in your reading for next episode, but like Heinz is basically wall broken for the next episode. And
I did get to that part.
Nice. You did?
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if it was in the previous reading or the next reading, so I didn't say anything. But yeah, I got to that.
And then like kind of think of like what that means, and then specifically like Zhang Beihai, his stuff that happens more towards the end of the next episode. So I would like really like focus on like what he's doing, and sort of like the signs that kind of lead up to that are really important. And what happens with the G at the next episode? I don't remember. Yeah, I mean all the comical stuff of like the of him almost getting killed like a million times like happens in this one. So, but I think like This episode, this next one there's a lot of kind of world building because we jump 200 years into the future or 180 years into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of stuff that he has to get caught back up on. And a lot of stuff I found like super interesting, like talking about like what happened since he went into hibernation until the current time. But yeah, I think like Hines and John Behai have probably the most important story points, I think, to really focus on.
I will say on the last page of this part, we close with everyone sort of dying. Like, Kent goes to Luoji's old house and like finishes his days in anonymity, and Zhang Yuan Chao dies and is buried in the yellow soil, like Dan said, and the intellectual is shot into space. Like basically people on Earth are dying, except for Ding Yi, who decides to hibernate. So I'd maybe keep an eye out for him because he has like more to do in the next part. And he's like a badass. I think he like wants his way. He wants to be on the ship that goes to intercept the aliens first. And they say, no, like you're not military. And finally he's like, I will commit suicide unless I will like kill myself right here unless you let me. And they're like, all right then.
And we get to see Dasher again. He comes back.
Oh,
we get to spend more time with him. And he does lots of cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. Did you like this last part? I know, we've been reading this in 3 parts. What did you think of this second part?
Yeah, I liked it. I think the next part, as I started reading it about, I don't know, they jump forward, however many years they jump forward. I thought that was more interesting to me, but I understand that they had to do all of these parts to get to that part. So yeah, I like it more now that I've read ahead of it. I think I liked it less as I was reading it. I appreciate it more now that I'm reading ahead.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, like, one of the things I want to talk to you and Tim about in the main show is like, what did you think of like the hard cut? Like, is it kind of off-putting? Like, oh wait, I just spent like 300 pages in the current world, and now we're like kind of banning it all to just focus on a couple main characters. But yeah, we could talk more about it on the main show. So listeners, you should listen to the main show too if you're not already.
Yeah. Well, Thalia and Dan, thanks for spoiling Dark Forest and Death's End for me, and thanks everyone else for listening. Leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter @rehydratepod. Please join us next episode for Natural Selection, the first third of part 3 of The Dark Forest by Lucy Shin. Thanks.